while you're thinking about questions, you come up and talk to us about yourselves, that's great. But, I want you to think about your organic matter. When I drive around, I see the soils are all pretty dark here. So I'm assuming they have more organic matter than we do in Ohio. Most of Ohio soils is 1% organic matter. So what does that mean to David? Every point of organic matter, we have about 50 pounds of free nitrogen. Not all that 50 pounds is available to the crop you're planting this year. About 50% of it. And I was told it's about 3 to 4% around here. So, you guys could probably have 100 pounds of nitrogen with your organic matter available to your next corn crop. And I'm looking to say, why don't you learn to adjust down your nitrogen rates to equal that this year? So I think if you've been using high rates of nitrogen, and I don't know what your normal rates are, but if you're pushing 200 units, you get 200 bushel corn. If you drop back to 180 or 160, you may lose a bushel of corn or two, but you've saved $80 or $90. So are you feeling better off at the coffee shop bragging about $80 savings or a 2 bushel yield increase? The only way you're going to know is to put the full rate on part of the field, reduce the rate a little bit, and everything we do, is I'm going to tell you, is in hindsight. Because what you do this year, you'll have to remember how it works so you can do it next year. Because the results are the yield, or the results of the return on investment. Those are the things I think about, and I really think if you're in a livestock business, you really need to be considering cover crops. Because, if you're in a dairy business, the problem is where are you going to put the manure? I really look at the dairyman or a livestock guy with a great advantage over corn and bean fella. Because you can take this rye or you can take a cover crop. And, I like to talk about rye because it's easy for soybeans, it's easy to grow. But you can take this rye and, if you're chopping silage, what do? You probably should haul manure. Throw the rye seed out there, lightly incorporate it, that's what you have to do. Or use a drill, or leave it lay on the surface. You got 4 or 5 options right there. So you get rid of a low rate of manure out of your pit or out of your storage facility. And we're talking, in Ohio, we're only allowed to put so much on, and we got dairymen putting on 30,000 gallons of clip, and they walk away because they pump it on with irrigation. What we're trying to do is get them to bring it down to about 3,000 or 4,000 gallons, 4 or 5 times during the year. Spread it out. So when you take the silage off, you put some on, plant the rye. In the wintertime, if it's green, it's fit to put it on. We don't want the soil froze 5 foot deep or anything like that, but if it's got a frost in the soil and you got a green cover, NRCS says you can spread manure on top of the ground if it's a green cover. So here's another shot to put on 3 or 4 or 3 ton, Then it grows up in the spring. If you agree, chop it to make good hay. And that's where the triticale works better than rye as far as I'm concerned. Because triticale has more protein. You're after protein. It'll yield the same. So why not think about triticale? A little more expensive, but you get more return. Chop the triticale off, haul the manure, plant your corn. Then you're back in the cycle of doing it again. So actually you have 4 times in that field to put manure on rather than 1 time with all you can throw on it, To me that makes sense because we spread out the risk of this phosphorus and nitrogen not leaving the field. I've preached enough. I'll try to answer all your questions or any questions you got. And Lance is right. The Haney test, the reason you saw 223 bushel of corn, that was the first year we did Haney test. Haney sent it back to me, which is Ward's Labs now and Regen. And he said, just put 50 pounds of nitrogen on, David, and you'll produce a corn crop. That man saved me $42,000 that year in our operation for a $50 soil sample that represented 40 acres, And you want to, if you're going to take these, you want to always take them at the same time. And you always want to take them in the spring or at lay-by for corn. Because you got to get that soil warm. You can do it in the cold. You know, you can do it in November. But it's not going to tell you anything because everything's dead. You know? Or everything's not dead. They're just dormant. Slow. They're moving slow, you know. Where in the summertime we want them active so we know what's going on. You know.
How deep is your test?
How deep the sample? 6 inches. Take a 6-inch sample. Usually one sample can represent 48. Well, we try to use what I'm going to call zones, or you know, the photography. You know, if you've got lots of hillsides and then flat bottoms, don't mix them two together. You know, do the hillsides and then do the flat. Up to 40 acres works really well. Interesting thing, as you do cover crops and you get them to go deeper than if you plant them after corn and beans, you can actually bring up trace elements and P and K that will actually be uniformly more advantageous than we've ever seen. It's interesting, I had a landlord we farmed for 13 years, and we grid sampled 13 years ago when we started. We kind of tried to balance what we could do, you know. And all of a sudden he called me last fall and he said, David, he said, a young man come to me and he showed me his grid sample maps, and he showed me his as-applied maps, and he showed me how he's putting herbicides on as applied, you know, as the weeds go. And he says, you're not doing any of this. And I said, sir, I don't need to do this, because I know I have had cover crops here 8 out of 9 years that we've been here. He says, what does that mean to me? And I said, I'm going to tell you that if you grid sample this farm again, every cell will be uniform. And he says, well, I don't believe you. You know, and I said, fine. I said, here's what we're going to do. We did acre grids on 200 acres. Each grid cost me $15 to get done at a regular lab. I says, when I'm done, if I have 2 cells that's not even, I'll give you $10 more an acre rent and I'll make them even. If they're less than 2, you reduce my rent by $25 an acre. Now, you still want to gamble? He said, yeah, because he says, this young man that came to me, he said, what you do is not right. I said, okay. We had 1 cell that was 3 pounds off on phosphorus compared to 217 of them. You know, that's how cover crops can help us.
What kind of a mix was that?
Well, you know, we started out with rye after corn. Right after corn, then we go to wheat. After the beans are off, then we go to a 6, 8, 10 way species, whatever we're after to do. You know, I think the goal is to probably be from 8 to 10 if you've got cereals in your rotation. You know, if you're in a corn bean guy, probably 3 or 4 is all you're going to get. You know, and you're going to get roots about as long as your palm of your hand. You know, if you make that 60 days or 90 days of growth in the summertime, you'll have roots 5, 6 foot deep.
What about interseeding in the corn? I mean, if you do it,
You know, it's better than in the fall, but we're still not getting the depth we like to see, because we get that canopy, that corn slowing down that cover crop to grow. It's still there if you pick the right cover crops. If you happen to pick cover crops that don't like shade, they're not going to be there, you know. So you have to learn how to manage that, and you probably have one of the nicest sources of seeds I think of here anywhere, and that's Albert Lee. We buy a lot of seed from Albert Lee to bring to Ohio to sell to our people, you know. So I respect Albert Lee and what they do, you know.
Hey Dave, I got a question.
Yes.
So, multiple people have asked about interseeding cereal rye, early season in corn, and I know they don't recommend it because they say you can't see shade. Have you ever done it? Have you ever tried it?
We've done it, and it will not take the shade as well. Things I like to clarify, it'll work really well if you're running 28 to 3,000, 30,000 plants per acre. If you're at 32 to 36, it's not gonna survive, you know? So it's gonna depend on your plant population. It's also gonna depend on what kind of variety you have. You know, if you have a variety that's only 5 foot tall when it's awesome, yes, the rye will survive underneath there. But if you got a corn crop that's as tall as the hood on the combine, 14 foot tall, it's not gonna make it. Now there's other species that can, you know, we can look at white Dutch clovers, we can look at ryegrass. I don't like ryegrass, I hate ryegrass. There's a place for it.
We use it a lot.
Use a lot. If you understand how to do it, you're in good shape. I don't understand how to make it work because I'm greedy. I want my cover crop to be big. So when I get ryegrass that's 2.5 or 3 foot tall, it's already bloomed, it's already making seed. And guess what, guys? I can't control it. Now, if you want to take it out at 2 or 3 inches or 4 inches tall, it's a great cover crop. And that's probably what you guys are doing, you know. But, you know, if you look at ryegrass, it has deep roots. You know, I've seen cereal rye has deep roots. 5 years ago, I had a professor from Penn State University come to our field day. We dug a soil spit, 4.5 foot deep. Rye was 2.5 inches tall. Roots were 4 foot deep from that rye, which I couldn't believe, and neither could the professor. He just, you know, he kept taking his knife and digging the soil and kept washing. He just had a fit because he didn't realize those roots would go that deep. You know? Yeah.
So just one thought on the cereal rye. I'm in southeast Minnesota, right? And we've done it many years on short corn, V1 to V4 corn, and we cannot get it, even if the corn is 6-8 feet tall. I think we have too much heat. But you get up on the I-90 corridor, and there's some pretty impressive, there's a father with 2 daughters, they did a video, and that's what they do. They do cereal rye on their short corn. I forget the name, maybe it's Sibley County, I forget the name of the county that did a video, but I mean, it's got like 50,000 views on YouTube. They're doing it. You know, I usually try on a few different farms every spring down by us, but to date in 5 or 6 years, it's never been there. So that's why we stick with annual ryegrass. But again, then we're not having any issues in spring to terminate like you do.
Well, I guess another question, another thing. It seems like, you know, we're south of 70. So anytime we try interseeding, I think we got so much heat during the day in August and September, even in October. You know, we'll be 85, 90 degrees in October shelling corn. You know, and I think that's a problem. If we get north of I-80, you know, interseeding is more successful, you know, probably 80-90% successful versus 30% successful south of 70. You know, so I think location has a lot to do with what we're trying to do. And that's why you have to learn how to adjust what's going on, you know.
Step back here.
Yes, go ahead.
Did you? Oh, shoot. I thought you had your hand up.
Oh.
You can haggle either of us, especially Dave.
Right.
So, for interseeding, you know, what are you putting down?
Typically annual ryegrass base, contrary to what, you know, Dave would advise, you know, 10, 12 pounds, and then a little bit of clover and some radishes or turnips, so 15, maybe 20 pounds total. You know, if you're at 10 or 12 pounds of ryegrass, and then 3 to 6 pounds of, you know.
When are you putting that?
V1 to 4, V5 you're gonna canopy too quick generally. You know, you're gonna lose, because you know, organic guys will do it on their last pass of cultivation, but yeah, if you're gonna try interseeding, it's gotta be early. That's what we've learned. And then if you're gonna try it, don't just try it on a field that runs east-west. Try some of the field north-south, because again, we're kind of playing in a different system than we're used to, you know. That would be my encouragement, you know, so.
You know, looking at your species you want to pick out for interseedings, you got to think about what your goal is once that crop comes off. Are you going to pasture, or are you just going to leave it go? I personally wouldn't waste my money on a turnip if you wouldn't go to pasture, because it's on the surface. You know, the bulb's on top of the ground. You know, that's when I like to think about a tillage radish or some kind of radish, or even maybe switching to a rate that would grow be green all winter long. I mean, rape will take a lot of cold weather, you know, and it don't have an enormous taproot, probably as big as my thumb, but we found them 30 inches deep, that deep, you know. Sometimes I think radishes are oversold. I really like radishes on the farm that we're just taking over because we know we got compaction problems. We'll put a lot of cereals with radishes, with a lot of legumes to go with it, so that everybody helps each other, you know, because what happens is the radish actually steals the nitrogen from the legume you put with it, and it gets bigger and goes deeper in the soil. If you're using radishes and rye, it won't have the tuber size, it won't have the depth to it. And the neat thing about it is if you challenge that legume crop that's fixing atmospheric nitrogen, they fix more nitrogen because that sucker's stealing from it, you know. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Can you talk about no-tilling corn, what cover crop you're using before that, and I know strip till's sort of getting some attention lately. Is that working?
Well, answer the strip till question first. In my mind, I think it's a way to go from what you're used to doing as a conventional farmer, using a strip till machine because it still takes a hell of a lot of horsepower, and you're feeling good about yourself, you know, and you're not moving as much soil. And then the next thing you'll have the cover crop and go away from the strip till machine. So I think it's a way to move to the pendulum bore close to cover crop. And most of our corn goes in after a wheat crop. We do take the straw that falls out of the combine out because we found that was a lot easier. We got rid of the extra thatch that lays on top of the ground that may cause us problems with slugs and water infiltration and all that stuff because it's shaded. And I got some idiot that's got a 4x4x8 square baler, and he's willing to pay me $27 a bale for straw, you know. So I get almost as much for the straw as I get for the grain bales, which hasn't hurt my field any. And then we go right in and plant 8 or a 10-way cover, which has grasses, cool season grasses, warm season grasses, cool season legumes, warm season legumes, 2 brassicas, and 1 broadleaf, or maybe 2. You know, and that's what we do.
And then you no-till corn into that,
No-till green right into it.
you roll it.
Roll it ahead behind the planter. The reason is we have this new white planter. It has no attachment other than fluted coater, and it does a really nice job. But if you put the crop roller behind it, it even does a better job because it covers up all the mistakes the planter makes, you know. And, you know, if you happen to leave the trench open and you roll the cover crop down over that trench, guess what? That corn comes up, you know. So I always like to roll afterwards. The planter runs through it easier, you know. It don't matter which direction you want to go. You know. If you got a high school kid or a 10-year-old kid that can sit in a tractor seat and he loves to run 10 miles an hour, who cares? You know, as long as he gets it mashed down and don't have a problem, you know, he's all right, you know.
So that cover crop, you know, when it's 6, 8 feet tall or whatever, you know, South Lake Watershed is,
Yeah.
that's not too thick of a mat to keep the corn or beans from coming up out of it?
We haven't seen any problem. You know, we'll once we roll down, we'll have probably a 3.5 or 4 inch thatch. Now, we're not planting the corn 3 inches deep. You know, I tend to be opposite what guys tell us. Maybe I'm wet, I don't know. But it's successful for me. We plant about 1.5 inches, 1 3/4 into the soil. We still got 3 inches to cover above there. We're still getting the brace roots to go in the ground. You know, all that stuff they tell us don't happen if you don't plant it deep. You know, but it emerges and comes up right away.
One question or thought that I get a fair amount is that following these soil health principles and regenerative agriculture doesn't yield. And Russell Hedrick is a pretty good friend of mine. I'm sure Dave knows him real well too. Look him up, Hedrick. is his last name. He set the North Carolina corn yield record, I think 3 years ago, and this past year, yield record for soybeans. And on very limited inputs and following lots of the soil health principles. So even had a bunch of university folks that come out to his farm and do trial year after year, and guess what, the trials get canceled, and that man knows how to make money. That's obviously important if we're gonna stay in the game. So there's several people that you could look up, but as far as using the Haney soil test and trying some of these principles, that man has only been farming for 10 years, he was a firefighter, he's a good friend of mine, I talked to him quite a bit. Some of the stuff he does will blow your mind, but maybe most importantly is his ROI per acre. And oh, by the way, those yields now are showing for themselves. So just a food for thought as we talk about, because yield is king, we've heard that so often, but again, we want to be able to pay for groceries and then some, so.
I really think the neat thing is here, like today, is learning how to network. I mean, Lance, we've been talking, we know each other, not as well as I'd like to know him, but, we'll. The same with Russell, Gabe Brown, you had Rick Clark here. These are all guys that will answer your questions, but the mentorship of being local community, getting together, maybe putting together groups of 8 or 10 guys that can talk to each other once a week or once a month or every 3 months or something, say, hey, David Brandt said do that, I don't know the shit, that's what you need to find out, because that's what you share, You may have a blue planter, you may have a yellow planter, and those are things that you need to know, to see, because you have to learn what works for your farm. And I love Russell, and I was at a meeting 2 weeks ago with Russell, and he was showing the results. He was blowing my mind, and I was sitting there thinking about this. He's running 2 or 3 legume crops ahead of the soybeans, and soybeans are legume, and I got thinking, my God, how can you have that much nitrogen in the soil and still have 117 bushel corn? The one thing I forgot, he's on sandy soils. He's got a CDC of 4. No wonder he needs nitrogen. You have to understand what your CEC means is how much you can hold. Here's a perfect example. Here's a 4 CEC, here's a 12. I mean, let's face it, guys. If your CEC is not big enough, it's not going to hold it. So you got to have stuff there during the season to make it work. And I don't mean to make fun. You got to have fun. But the point is, your soils are all different. So you're going to have to. What we talk about here is things to make you think about it, and how can I make this work on my place in some scale, And yes, it's fun to do the whole thing. The risk is great, and there's, I did this for years, and I used to go out and I show all these great pictures and talk all these yields, and never say there was problems, And I learned my lesson 4 or 5 years ago, because guys keep calling, well, it didn't work that way, David. Well, try again. But most guys just want to quit once it kicks you. But you got to hang in there, because the 4th, 5th, 6th year, man, that 7th year, we got farms that we thought we'd never make it. And the 6th year, we jumped 30 to 40 bushel on corn. We jumped 15, 20 bushel on beans. We jumped 60 bushel on wheat. But it just took that long to get that soil to respond. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say, in our experience, what I've learned is a lot of what you do this year isn't helping you this year, it's helping you next year.
Next year.
Or 2 years after.
2 years, right. And not, even though we show we can grow or retain 400 pounds of nitrogen, not all that's available this year, guys. And, I learned my lesson 5 years ago, because I saw that chart I showed you with all those pounds of nitrogen from all those legumes. Remember that? So Dave Brandt put 16 damn legume plants in the mix and planted them. Man, I had the most beautiful stand of legumes I've ever seen. On May the 1st, I sent a soil sample to Rick Haney, because Rick and I were good buddies, and And 4 to 5 days later, Rick sends a note back. David, you've got 750 pounds of nitrogen per acre in this field. Good luck. That's what it said. You know? I thought, man, you know, I don't have to buy nothing. So about the 28th day of May, I get the corn planter out and I'm going to the field, you know. And it's an 8-row planter with splitters on it, so we fill all the boxes up. And you know, I don't know how much it weighs, but it's damn heavy. And it won't go in the ground. You know. My wife comes out, she says, what are you doing? I said, well, I can't get this thing in the ground. So I says, well, we're going to get your unit and we put 6,000 pounds of suitcase weights on the frame. Broke all the down pressure springs. Still couldn't get it in the ground. So I called Rick Haney back up. I says, what are you talking about, Rick? And he says, did you get your corn planted? I said, no. Boy, he says, you dummy. He says, you know, when I was in the Philippines, we used to put anhydrous in the sand to make a runway. He said, you did the same thing with all those lagoons. You know. It only took 2.5 years to straighten it out. So I found out you can't get green, you know. So these are my downfalls, you know, these are my problems I faced. So you'll always make sure that you run a grass with a lagoon to help that carbon to nitrogen sequencing, you know.
One thought about, you know, going into trying to plant no-till corn into a cover crop, instead of going just straight cereal rye, I would advise trying some mixture of rye and or winter wheat and or with some triticale, just because of that carbon to nitrogen ratio, that penalty, if you will, and make sure we're front loading enough nitrogen up front. Maybe you touched on that, but yeah, we definitely have to you know, consider that nitrogen source early, you know, so.
Well, another thing, I think, if you're going to green chop the rye or the triticale and you want to plant corn, just give it about a week or 10 days to grow back, because about the 4th day after you've chopped that stuff and that's brown and the sun cooks that soil, it's just like concrete. So just give it time to grow back. That'll loosen the soil back up, and you'll have enough residue there then to handle, keep it from getting so hot in the summertime. More questions?